For franchisors, one of the biggest questions is, should you sell a franchise to an individual that enters the United States with a visa? Typically, we'll hear about E2 visas, EB-5 visas. Some of the questions franchisors have is, should I sell franchises to these candidates? What's involved? What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages? And today I'm glad to welcome a very good friend, Jaime Sanchez. Jaime is the founder of Interlink, and Interlink, Jaime, his team, they're franchise consultants. They help foreign nationals invest here in the United States. They work with franchisee candidates and they work with franchisors. Jaime, welcome.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for having us. And I'm glad to talk about all the foreign investor stuff.
You know what, Jaime, and I'm glad we're doing this together. And it's such an important topic because I'll get calls so often. Clients will ask me, hey, Charles, what's the disadvantages if I sell a franchise to a candidate with an E2 visa or an EB-5 visa? And there's always confusion as to what's involved in the visas, who are they a good fit for? And so I think today's a great opportunity because you are an expert in this space. You're working with franchisee candidates. I know you have a background where you're familiar with these visas. And so I think it's important to do a deep dive here. Jaime, just briefly, as it relates to foreign investors, and so we could connect the dots, just basically your background in this area.
Yeah, so I worked at an immigration law firm and we filed a lot of E2s. I would actually build also their business plans that they need to submit with their application, with their E2 application, in order to qualify for the investor visa. So I would do all that financial side in the immigration law firm. And that's how we saw people, by doing all these processes, we found that people were figuring out what to invest in and they didn't know how to go about it. So franchising was the perfect solution for them.
Yeah, and you've built a great organization. I see it all the time. You're working with candidates, you're trying to help them achieve life goals. And so generally, because before we started this stream, you gave a great description between immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas. So if we could just set the platform, set the stage here, generally what is, and this is all from the perspective of an individual entering the United States, looking to invest in a franchise, and they're not a US citizen or resident, but they have a visa. So just setting the stage, the basics, what is an E2 visa and what is an EB-5 visa?
Sure. So an E2 visa is a non-immigrant visa used by individuals that have a nationality that have treaties with the United States. So we work with a lot of Latin American countries like Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, also European countries like Spain. And basically they just need to invest a substantial amount. So there's no amount set by anyone. So any business that qualifies and creates jobs will be a good fit for these visas, right? So franchising fits really well because it proves that it's a real and operating business. And usually franchises require a substantial investment. So that's kind of with the E2.
So Jaime, so E2 visa, it's a non-immigrant visa. It has lower threshold requirements than an EB-5 visa, right? And the primary obligation is that the person applying for the visa must make a substantial investment in a startup business or franchise in the United States, right? And that substantial investment, what type of threshold number are we looking at?
Yeah, so the government doesn't have a set number, but for example, in our firm, we recommend candidates to have over 120 to 150 for the business. And we make that very clear because that does not cover personal expenses, right? So we want them to be safe in their investment, right? So that's kind of like our floor that we can work with people, right? And actually be able to help them, position them into a good business because they're all cash, right? They can't finance.
Right. And so when you say 120 to 150, that's cash, and that's cash that's going to be deployed and invested in either paying the franchise fee and starting up the franchise business, right?
Correct.
So, and then one common thread on all these visas is that whether it's the E2 visa or EB-5, the government in granting these are looking for the visa applicant to be creating jobs in the United States, correct?
Correct. So yeah, usually franchises, for example, we work more with franchises that will at least have 1 or 2 employees at least. So a lot of the owner operators models are not that great for these candidates.
Right, which is a good point for franchisors listening in. And we're going to go into this a little more detail. Jaime's point here is if your franchise is an owner operated business, like a man in a van or a woman in a van, it's not a good candidate for you to attract these visa applicants because one of the prerequisites is the creation of jobs. And so now E2 visa, non-immigrant, we're looking for substantial investment between 120 to 150K. You're going to employ individuals, maybe at least 1 or 2 employees.
Correct.
And now, Jaime, let's talk about EB-5 in comparison. What is an EB-5 visa based upon?
So an EB-5 is an immigrant visa, and that's when you have to create the 10 employments full time for a 5-year period. Okay, so not all franchises are going to apply, and not all franchises will create 10 jobs full time continuously, right? So they can't be just temporary jobs; they have to be full time jobs. So some of the risks of that is that you need to employ that amount of people from the beginning, right? And you have to prove that you're creating those jobs for that period of time, right?
Jaime, for EB-5 visas, what type of investment is the government looking for?
So recently, there's been a lot of changes continuously by the Senate. It has been back and forth. It started with $500,000 investment, and then it went up about $900,000, and then it's gone down again. I don't remember the amount that it is right now, but I think it's between 700,000 or 800,000.
And so an EB-5 visa applicant, that is an immigrant status visa. That visa holder is a resident of the United States, right?
Once they're approved, yes. So they will get a conditional green card, and then once that conditional green card is approved, they'll be green card holders.
Okay. So foundational, we have E2 visas, EB-5 visas. E2 visa is a quicker pathway, or it seems less restrictive. E2 visa, not an immigrant visa. It's focused on investment. We're looking for substantial investment, 120K to 150K, and you're going to employ 1 to 2 employees. EB-5 visa is going to grant you residence here in the United States, but the requirements are much more strict. We're looking at higher investment levels, and the biggest requirement is that you're going to employ 10 individuals from the start. Is that a good recap of the differences?
Yeah, and the investment right now is 800,000, but all these amounts have changed in like a period of 1 year consistently.
Okay, so but it gives a good framework, right? EB-5, we're talking a much higher price point, and when we talk about investment, it's capital on hand by the applicant to bring into the United States and to purchase the franchise and use in the startup phase. So that 800K, let's assume that's the number for an EB-5. They have to spend that 800K upfront before the business opens.
So they have to prove that they invested that amount of money, and they have to also prove the trace of the funds and how the funds got to where they are, right? So basically, how did you make those 800K? And you have to even show a history of all the movement of the money in your country, right? So that creates sometimes obstacles, because imagine finding documents for like 10, 15 years. And, depending on how you came about that money, it could be complex or easy.
And Jaime, so when someone buys a franchise and we look at item 7, estimated initial investment, does that 120 to 150K, can part of that be in a bank account here in the States as reserve capital?
So I guess you're talking now about you're asking me about E2s?
Yeah. Okay. Let's recap. Actually, let's start with E2.
Okay.
And let's start from the beginning, because I'm jumping ahead a little.
Hmm.
For the franchisors out there watching this video, and even franchisee candidates, but for the franchisors that want to know, should I offer E2 visas, franchises to E2 visa holders? Is it even a good fit for us? What are the top things they should know?
That's a great question. I wish more franchisors would ask that question. So, well, one of the things that franchisors need to understand and know about the E2 visa is that they need to make the investment in order to get the visa, right? So the investment comes first, visa comes later, right? So a lot of times there is like a gap where they can't do anything, where they paid the franchise fee and now they're waiting for their visa. So these are some obstacles that sometimes the candidates themselves kind of, because they can't work right legally because their visa is not approved and it's in process. And sometimes these processes can take 5 to 6 months to come about, right? So I know for the franchisor, sometimes it's like, well, I can't wait 5 or 6 months for you to operate if you already paid the franchise fee, right? So that's one thing that tends to happen a lot. Two is there's a lot of misunderstandings about E2 visas. Not everyone can qualify, so they have to be. What I would recommend any franchisor is to make sure that the candidate is working with an immigration attorney that's going to kind of guide them the right way, because they might not even qualify for an investor visa, even if they have the money. And maybe, for example, say they're from Brazil, well, they can't get an E2 visa because they don't qualify automatically. So you're wasting your time and you're wasting the candidate's time. But so that's another thing that tends to happen.
I mean, let's go into the timing, because you brought up a great point.
Mhm.
So for E2 visa, it's an investment-based visa. And your point, your statement is the franchisee candidate needs to make the investment first. So
Mhm.
we run into the situation where a broker or there's a connection,
Mhm.
and it's going to be an E2 visa franchisee candidate. And now the next conversation is they will sign the franchise agreement. They need to make the investment. But once we do that, then we have to apply for the visa. And it's good. Your point is, it takes about 5 to 6 months for this process.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the country, and a lot of it has been affected, obviously, with COVID, right? These timelines have been affected depending on the consulate, how long they were closed, etc. But it could take up to that long. And in some countries, for example, Argentina, it's taking about a year to get those visas approved. So imagine both the franchisor, they're waiting on the candidate to get their visa, but the candidate is also waiting to get their visa, right? And it's not anyone's fault.
So now we let's assume we're deciding to move forward. Franchisees disclose with the FDD. They're paying the franchise fee. I assume they're asking for an addendum that states if they don't get their visa, they receive a refund of their fee.
No. So basically, they're not doing that anymore. So in the E2 rules, the only contingency that you can put on an escrow account basically is approval of the visa, right? It's possible to do it, but it doesn't really work. All that contingency doesn't work well with startup franchises. With resales, it that contingency works well.
So there's no contingency with the franchisors. They receive.
If it's a first visa, I mean, if it's a starting franchise, usually there's no contingency. When it's a resale, you could use it.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now we sign the franchise agreement. They pay the franchise fee. Is there anything that the franchisor needs to supply or that they could help with to facilitate this?
No. All the documents generated, the individual themselves gather it. So creating the bank account, the franchise agreement, all those documents are originated automatically with the actions taken to acquire the franchise.
And then, Jaime, how is the applicant, the visa applicant, demonstrating that the franchise investment will employ one or two individuals?
Yeah, so usually with proof of payroll, sometimes with I think it's a W-4, also the 941s, tax returns.
So they
Depends.
don't need to prove that before. That happens after they get the visa.
So the business, so it's kind of interesting, right? Because in the guidelines, for the E2 visa, it says that the business needs to be operating or about to be operating. So very close to be operating. So the business doesn't necessarily have to be operational to apply for the visa. So in these cases, we use a business plan to create those numbers or those projections, right? So we use so for a lot of these visas, we use projections. So, but if the time you apply, it's a new business and there's no operation, right? You use a business plan. And that business plan contains what is the projected P&L, how many people you're going to employ, what's your cash flow going to look like, how much is the investment going to look like. So the business plan is key to these processes as well.
And so we have timing and we have the process. You
Mm-hmm.
also mentioned about qualification. So are there steps the franchisor could put in place to make sure they're not wasting their time and that this franchisee candidate's on the right track and they're doing the right things?
Great questions too. So, for example, we don't work with anyone unless they speak English or the person operating the business speaks English. Why? Because most franchisors don't have other speaking in terms of support, right? All the training is done in English, all the documents are done in English. So, one of our main requisites is one, language, two, the investment amount that I told you, like the 120, 150, because that qualifies well for a substantial investment to qualify for the business. And then our third criteria that is really important, and it should be really important for franchisors as well, is that someone is going to be involved in the business, one of the owners, right? And that's key because a lot of times, a lot of foreign candidates think that franchising is fully passive, right? So they have that misunderstanding. So, in order to qualify for the visa, you need to work in the business.
So now, for the franchisors out there, if there's well, there is, but if we're right now speaking before a big audience of franchisors, what types of franchise systems, types of franchisors should be considering E2 visa candidates, and what franchisors should absolutely not be considering them?
So, for example, obstacles that franchisors may face with foreign franchisees is also the terms of licensing in the States for that specific business. So, for example, in Florida, there are some restrictions for contractors. So they need to have certain requirements by the state to have that license. And it's not that easy for foreigners to qualify for those licenses. So a lot of times it's also a state to state thing, right? Because of these licensing requirements. For example, we do a lot of work with foreigners in Texas because it's more lax in terms of licensing and all those things, right?
Okay.
So California is also more strict, but in terms of industry, I would say we work with a lot of service industries, like anything with remodeling, construction, cleaning, commercial cleaning, residential. Food can also be good. Beauty can also be good. Those kinds of industries seem to work really well. Things like med spas and chiropractors and things that require more licensing and then are more regulated will probably have more obstacles, right? If it's an E2 applicant, right? But a lot of times, sometimes the E2 applicants come with American partners that they're in, so they can use the American partner to facilitate a lot of those things. So if the E2 candidate has an American partner, there will be a lot of things that will be facilitated with that American partner in the group.
Yeah, that's a great framework. And then At the beginning, you prefaced it also, which is that the franchisee needs to be a good fit for your system, and your example being avoid those franchisees that believe it's just a totally passive investment.
100%, 100%.
Yeah,
And
and then
there, yeah.
no, please.
So I was going to mention a big thing that I see is cultural. Like if they're very far away from culturally from the American way, it's going to be very hard for them to adapt in the business sense, right? We see that a lot when they haven't been influenced a lot by American culture, or that they haven't gone to school in the US, or that they've done something in the US. Those people tend to have a little bit more like a cultural shock per se in business.
Well, that brings a good issue, right? So you're dealing with smart individuals that are making an investment, but English many times a second language for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so also I think franchisors need to factor in what are the skills the franchisee needs. Is it a service business where the franchisee needs to be selling door to door and other things? Or is it a brick and mortar retail restaurant where the location is going to drive the sales? So I think those factors come into play.
Those are really big things, and that's something in our firm that we really look closely at, because a lot of times those franchises that are more that want the owner to be more on the sales position are not going to be that great, and franchises that like to build teams, that like to more management style, those will do better with E2 candidates, because that's what they're used to doing in their country, because they have usually they're business owners over there, and they're not really that operational anymore in their business. They're more used to doing management.
So Jaime, so I think we have a great foundation, E2 visas, right? We're looking to employ 1 to 2 individuals here. It's not an immigration visa.
Mm-hmm.
EB-5,
Mm-hmm.
based on our discussion, that requires a higher investment threshold.
Mm-hmm.
It is an immigration type visa. They're going to get resident status here. What would be a situation where EB-5, I guess the qualifications or requirements for EB-5 are stricter. We have the 10 employee minimum requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see EB-5 working really well?
Some food concepts and larger concepts that have brick and mortar, because you need to employ 10 people. You need to put those 10 people somewhere, right? So a lot of those smaller franchises won't be that good, and you need a business model that needs those 10 employees, right? Because some models, you put 10 employees, it's not going to work, right? But a lot of maybe food concepts could be good concepts for that kind of visa, and also maybe large service-based franchises that will need that amount of employees to be well operationally. The thing is also, a lot of times for these candidates, they're more rare to see in the franchising world, because usually most EB-5 candidates will apply to the regional centers, EB-5 regional centers, which are other kinds of investments not relevant to franchising.
Okay.
That generate those 10 jobs and that give those criteria.
I mean, during the process, when we were talking E2, right,
Mm-hmm.
the applicant is submitting, projections and other information. How active do you see franchisors assisting in that process, or not active at all?
In what part exactly?
Well, when the candidate needs to now signs a franchise agreement, needs to submit, here's our projected cash flow, who we're going to employ. Do the franchisors get involved in that process?
I mean, they get involved like they would with an American candidate.
Okay.
So we give them kind of that support internally. Like our firm explains to them how to read a P&L. Like we make it easier for them to understand what they're getting themselves into, which is something that, well, for most franchisees coming in, they're American, right, in the system. So they understand all the systems in play right? They understand what the IRS is, right? A foreigner doesn't know what the IRS is, right? They don't know what an EIN number is. They have to explain all those little things that they may not understand. So all those are like cultural barriers that a foreigner has.
And then, so let's assume we go through the process, an E2 visa, it's a good fit, everything works out, the candidate is up and running. What does the future look like? Is there a process where they have to renew their visa? Is there a concern if it's a 10-year franchise? What does that typically look like?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So usually once they have their visa, everything gets easier because now they have their social security number. Now they have expenses. Now they have, they can start building credit now. So everything becomes easier on all ends once a visa is approved, right? So the applicant usually they need to renew their visa every 4 to 5 years. Usually that's the average. Some countries will be less. So it's anywhere between 3 months and 5 years, depending on the treaty country. But as long as the business is operational, they have an E2, and it's renewable unlimited times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jaime, I can't thank you enough because the questions come up so often.
Mhm.
And for franchisors out there, Jaime is an amazing resource, amazing person. Get in touch with Interlink, get in touch with Jaime, because I think this is a good opportunity for franchise systems with the E2 visas. Anything else you'd like to leave off on, Jaime?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think E2 applicants can be really good, but you need to know how to filter them. I think that's the most important key. Or if someone can take away something is there are good E2 candidates, but not all can be good E2 candidates. Like if they're not going to follow the system, if they're not going to follow the model, they're not going to be good candidates, whether they're E2 or not, right? But sometimes a lot of those E2 candidates have more obstacles or don't want to follow that system.
Which is traditional good franchise sales, franchise development. And the big takeaway, I think, today, and your great advice, Jaime, is, don't overlook or discount this growth opportunity and these candidates.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Jaime, I'm really happy we did this together, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles.